something is hiding in the Australian bush outside Adelaide, not behind thick rainforest canopy or buried under desert sand. Right there in the scrub, on ridgelines, along creek beds, and under tangled root systems that most hikers walk straight past without ever looking twice. Stone walls that predate European settlement. Underground chambers sealed with a precision that takes your breath away the first time you crouch down and look at the joinery. Rock alignments stretching for hundreds of meters towards specific points on the horizon. These structures exist. They have been photographed, documented, and argued over by researchers, geologists, and historians for decades. And not one of them has produced a definitive answer for how they got there or who built them. The official position from Australian heritage bodies is careful and deliberately vague. Indigenous oral traditions reference some of these sites, but not all of them, and the geological explanations offered for certain structures collapse entirely the moment you examine the construction angles and the precise weight distribution of the stones involved. So what are these things? Today we go through 10 ancient structures found in the bush around Adelaide that no one has been able to fully explain. We are not here to push theories. We are here to lay out what is actually there, what researchers have actually said, and where the evidence breaks down. Number 10 now. Number 10. The Morialta ridgeline walls. Most visitors who drive out to Morialta Conservation Park come for the waterfalls. They follow the marked trail, take their photographs, and leave. What they miss is what sits on the ridgeline above the third fall, reachable only after about 40 minutes of pushing through dense scrub and loose shale. Up there, running for approximately 230 meters along the edge of the gorge, is a dry stone wall, not a scattered line of rocks pushed aside by someone clearing ground, a constructed wall. The stones are stacked in a deliberate pattern, with larger flat base stones supporting smaller fitted pieces above them. The wall averages about 70 centimeters in height and maintains a consistent 60 centimeters in width across its full length. In several sections, it incorporates natural outcrops of quartzite directly into the structure, meaning whoever built it was actively working around and incorporating the existing geology rather than simply clearing and stacking whatever was handy. Local bushwalkers first photographed the structure in the 1980s. A heritage survey followed in the early 1990s, and the result was recorded as inconclusive. The survey noted that the construction technique did not match any documented colonial dry stone walling tradition in the region. The primary reason for that assessment was the stone selection pattern. The stones were placed with their weathered faces outward, showing an awareness of long-term structural stability that goes beyond functional necessity. No tools were recovered anywhere near the site, no mortar or binding material of any kind, and no written record from any settler in the Adelaide Hills area makes reference to building anything on that ridgeline. The most common geological dismissal is that the wall is a natural tor formation produced by freeze-thaw weathering. The problem is that tor formations do not produce consistent width, and they do not produce right-angle corners. The Morialta ridgeline wall has 3 clearly defined right-angle corners. It was a deliberately shaped enclosure, and nobody knows who shaped it. Number 9. The Wirra stone platform. Wirra Recreation Park sits about 40 kilometres north of Adelaide in low-rolling scrub country. Visitors know it as a quiet weekend destination. What almost nobody realises is that somewhere in the western section, set back from the creek system on a slight natural rise, there is a flat stone platform roughly 8 metres by 6 metres in dimension. The surface stones are sandstone slabs, and none of them are native to the immediate geological zone. They were transported to this location. The nearest sandstone outcrop of matching composition is approximately 4 kilometres to the northeast. The platform surface is level to within a few centimetres across its entire span. On sloping ground, achieving that requires active preparation of the substrate below the stone layer, not just finding flat rocks and laying them down. When a researcher from Flinders University examined the site in 2004, he noted that the foundation levelling beneath the platform slabs indicated either a high degree of construction planning or use and refinement over multiple generations. He concluded that the structure did not fit the pattern of either Aboriginal ceremonial stone arrangements or colonial pastoral infrastructure. He filed his findings with the South Australian Heritage Council. Nothing further was published. The question of what this platform was used for has no agreed answer. Its elevated position, gives a clear line of sight to the northwest, toward a specific gap in the ranges that aligns with the setting sun on the winter solstice. That may be coincidence, but it is the kind of coincidence that keeps people coming back with compasses and notebooks. Number 8. The Onkaparinga carved stones. The Onkaparinga River cuts through one of the most scenic gorges near Adelaide before opening out toward the coast. Along a specific stretch of the gorge wall, accessible at low water on the eastern bank, there is a series of carved marks in the schist rock face. These are not recent graffiti. The patina on the cuts is deep and consistent with very old exposure to the elements. The markings include a series of parallel horizontal lines interrupted by angular cuts, a set of what appear to be nested concentric arcs, and 2 isolated symbols that do not correspond to any catalogued petroglyphic tradition in South Australia. The concentric arcs are the most discussed element. Similar arc patterns do appear in Aboriginal rock art traditions across Australia, and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains do have well-documented artistic traditions. But the specific configuration at Onkaparinga, and particularly its combination with the angular linear cuts alongside it, has not been matched to any identified ceremonial or narrative tradition by any cultural authority consulted on the matter. One senior Kaurna elder, consulted by a documentary researcher in 2017, said the markings were old and that they were not something his community had made. He said they were already there when the stories began. That statement has been quoted in 3 separate research papers. It has also been dismissed by 2 academic reviewers who suggested the elder may have been misquoted or speaking metaphorically. Those dismissals were written without the reviewers having visited the site. Number 7. The McLaren Vale alignment. Drive south from Adelaide through the wine country toward McLaren Vale, and the landscape opens into a series of gentle ridges covered in old scrub and dry pasture. On a property boundary in the hills above the township, running across a paddock that has been partially cleared for grazing, there is a row of standing stones. There are 11 of them. The tallest reaches approximately 1.4 metres above ground level. They are spaced at intervals that vary slightly, but average around 3.8 metres apart. They are set in a line that runs precisely from north-northeast to south-southwest. A surveyor hired privately by the current landholder in 2011 confirmed the alignment using GPS. The stones are native ironstone, consistent with the local geology in a broad sense, but several of them show flat vertical faces on their eastern aspect that could only have been achieved through deliberate dressing. The natural weathering profile of ironstone in this region does not produce flat vertical faces. Those surfaces were worked by hand or by tool. The base of each stone sits in a depression that appears to have been dug, filled with smaller packing stones, and then the upright set in place and stabilised. This is a construction technique. It is not a natural deposit or a cleared fence line. The landholder's family has farmed the property since the 1880s. Family records reference the stones as already present when the first settlers broke the ground in that paddock. No one in 6 generations of that family has been able to say who put them there. Number 6. The Barossa Underground Chamber. This one sits on private property in the ranges east of the Barossa Valley. The owner has permitted researchers to visit, but has asked that the specific location not be published, which is entirely reasonable given what has happened to similar sites elsewhere when coordinates go online. What has been published is a detailed written account by a geologist who inspected the chamber in 2009. The entrance is a stone-lined shaft approximately 1.2 metres in diameter, dropping about 2.5 metres vertically before opening into a horizontal passage, roughly 1.8 metres high, and wide enough for one person to move through comfortably. The passage runs for approximately 14 metres before opening into a chamber about 4 metres by 3 metres. The walls of the chamber are dressed stone. The ceiling is a corbelled arch, made from overlapping flat slabs, constructed without mortar of any kind. At the far end of the chamber, there is a flat stone set at waist height, the surface of which shows a circular depression about 30 centimetres in diameter ground into its centre. The geologist's report noted that the corbelling technique used in the ceiling is consistent with construction methods documented in prehistoric stone chambers found in Ireland and Scotland. He was careful to state this did not mean builders from those places had constructed the Barossa chamber. It means the technique is ancient, and the people who built this understood how to manage compressive load in a stone roof without a keystone. That is not a simple engineering concept. The age of the stone surfaces has not been formally tested. The chamber has no known colonial era documentation and does not appear on any pastoral survey map of the district. It was simply there when the current family's ancestors first explored the property, and it has been there ever since. Number 5. The Clare Valley marker stones. North of Adelaide, up through the patchwork farming country of the Clare Valley, there is a cluster of stones on open grassland at the edge of a dry creek bed that has drawn attention since at least the 1970s. There are 7 stones in total, none of them taller than about 80 centimetres, arranged in a rough horseshoe formation opening toward the east. What makes them significant is not the stones themselves, but what was found underneath one of them. In 1978, a local farmer moved one of the smaller stones during a fencing project. Underneath it, he found a flat slab, and underneath that slab, a shallow pit containing what appeared to be ash, 3 fragments of quartz, and a piece of worked bone, approximately 12 centimetres long. He reported his find to the South Australian Museum. The bone fragment and the quartz were logged and catalogued. A radiocarbon date was attempted on the ash. The results came back with a date range that the museum initially refused to publish because it suggested the deposit was older than the accepted timeline of the region's human habitation. When the results were eventually released under a Freedom of Information request in 2003, the date range was between 9,000 and 11,000 years before present. The museum's official position remains that the dating result requires independent replication before it can be considered reliable. That independent replication has not been funded. The horseshoe of stones is still sitting there at the edge of that dry creek bed in Clare Valley, and the one question everyone who visits it ends up asking is the same question that farmer asked in 1978 when he put that slab back in place and walked back to his fencing. Who put this here? Number 4. The Aldgate Valley enclosure. The Adelaide Hills suburb of Aldgate sits in a fold of the Mount Lofty Ranges that was settled early in the colonial period. The surrounding bushland still holds a lot of its original character. On a south-facing slope, above a seasonal creek, about 3 kilometres from the township, there is what can only be described as an enclosure. It is a circular arrangement of stones roughly 18 metres in diameter, with a defined entrance gap on the northern side. The perimeter stones are mostly buried, their tops just visible at ground level, suggesting they have been in place long enough for significant soil accumulation to build up around them over a very long time. The interior of the circle was surveyed in 2016 by a team of volunteer archaeologists working independently of any institutional body. They used ground-penetrating radar and found evidence of disturbed soil across the entire interior, consistent with either extensive digging activity or the decomposition of organic material over a very long period. No artifacts were recovered from the surface. The entrance gap is exactly wide enough to admit one person at a time, and the stones flanking it are the largest in the entire perimeter, placed in a way that would frame anyone moving in or out of the space. No one has produced a satisfying explanation for why a circular stone enclosure of this size exists in this location. Colonial cattle yards were not built in circles. Aboriginal stone arrangements in South Australia were generally smaller and on elevated ground. This one is on a slope, partly buried, and oriented in a way that no researcher has explained to anyone's satisfaction. Number 3. The Kanmantoo stone lines. About 50 kilometres east of Adelaide, in the low scrub country around Kanmantoo, the bush opens into rolling hills of pale grass and scattered stringy bark. A property manager working the area in the early 2000s noticed that certain sections of the low scrub appeared to follow unnaturally straight lines across the landscape. When he walked the lines on foot and mapped them with a GPS unit, he found 3 separate stone rows running parallel to each other at a spacing of approximately 22 metres, extending for nearly 400 metres, before the land dropped into a gully, and the feature disappeared beneath the slope. Each row consists of stones averaging about 30 centimetres in diameter, set close together but not touching, with a maximum gap between adjacent stones of about 15 centimetres. The stones are not dressed. They are not shaped, but they are selected. Each stone in each row is roughly the same size and roughly the same shape. In a landscape where the natural distribution of surface stone is entirely random and varied. Selecting and placing consistently sized material across 400 meters of terrain in 3 parallel rows is not a casual act. Somebody made this deliberately. A geologist proposed a natural explanation involving differential frost heaving along underground fracture lines. 3 other geologists noted the region does not experience sufficient frost events to produce heave on this scale, and that the stone selection consistency could not be explained by heave mechanics regardless. The debate was published in a regional geological journal in 2008. No resolution was reached. The stone lines are still there, and no one who has walked their full length has come away with a confident explanation. Number 2. The Fleurieu Peninsula Chamber Complex. Down on the Fleurieu Peninsula south of Adelaide, on a stretch of coast where the scrub runs close to the cliff edge, there are 2 stone chambers built into a natural rock overhang above a sea cave. They are accessible only at low tide and require a 30-minute scramble along the cliff base to reach. This is almost certainly why they survived the colonial period without documentation. Nobody went there without a specific reason. The first chamber is small, barely large enough for one person to sit upright inside, lined with flat stones on all 4 sides and with a stone slab ceiling. The second chamber is larger, approximately 2 meters by 2 meters, and features a carefully constructed stone threshold at its entrance, a raised flat stone that you must step over to enter. The walls of the second chamber include 3 horizontal courses of fitted stonework above the natural rock base, bringing the effective ceiling height to about 1.6 meters. A maritime archaeologist who visited the site in 2014 noted that the construction showed no evidence of lime mortar or any colonial binding material, and that the stone fitting was executed with a precision suggesting either significant time investment or a high familiarity with dry stone construction. She compared the threshold arrangement to similar features in Bronze Age coastal structures in Western Europe, and was careful to state this was an observation about technique rather than a claim about cultural origin. Her report was submitted to the Heritage Council. It was acknowledged and filed. The chambers face north, looking back toward the peninsula rather than out to sea. Whatever they were built for, the view out to the Southern Ocean was not the point. Number 1. The Mount Magnificent Alignment. South of Adelaide, in the hills near Myponga and Encounter Bay, there is a ridge called Mount Magnificent. It is not dramatic by mountain standards, but it commands a clear view in almost every direction. And on that ridge, running along the highest point of the spine for approximately 600 meters, there is a stone alignment that has never been formally explained and has never been formally investigated by any funded body with the resources to do it properly. The alignment consists of flat stones pressed into the ground on their edges, creating a low continuous border, averaging about 40 centimeters in height. It follows the ridgeline with a precision that suggests whoever built it understood the topography well enough to use the natural elevation as a deliberate element. In several places, the alignment incorporates large existing boulders, routing around them and then continuing in the same direction on the other side, as if the boulder was always intended to be part of what was being built. At the southern end, the alignment terminates in a cluster of upright stones, forming a rough triangle. At the northern end, it terminates in a single large upright stone that stands about 1.2 meters above the surrounding ground and has a notch cut into its upper edge. That notch is the detail most researchers find hardest to dismiss. It is not a natural feature of the quartzite it is cut into. Quartzite does not cleave in that profile naturally. Someone cut it. And its orientation, when used as a sighting point, aligns with the rising position of the Southern Cross at a specific date in the year. That date corresponds in multiple Aboriginal astronomical traditions to a significant point in the seasonal calendar. The South Australian Heritage Register lists Mount Magnificent as an area of general bushland significance. The alignment itself does not appear in the register. When a researcher asked in 2019 when it might be formally assessed, the heritage officer said she was not in a position to say. That was over 6 years ago. What we actually know, 10 structures. 10 sets of questions that heritage bodies, geologists, and archaeologists have not been able to close. That is the honest summary of where things stand in the Adelaide bush. What is clear is that these structures exist and that they were made by someone. What is not clear is who built them, when, and why. Some of them may eventually be explained by research that has not yet been funded. Some may sit in the inconclusive column indefinitely because no institution sees sufficient value in spending the money to find out, and some of them may require us to seriously reconsider what we think we understand about the human history of this continent before European contact. That last possibility is the one that makes official bodies most uncomfortable, because if even 2 or 3 of these structures are genuinely ancient and built by a culture we have not documented, it changes the conversation about what this land held before the first fleet and the first surveys. It does not diminish the history of Australia's First Nations peoples. If anything, it adds depth to it, and it asks us to keep looking, rather than assume we have already found everything worth finding. These structures are not going anywhere. The bush around Adelaide is patient. The stones have been waiting a long time for someone to take them seriously enough to actually look. If you know of a structure in this region that belongs on this list, put it in the comments. This kind of research moves forward through people who walk the land, not through people who decide from officers what deserves to be assessed. Subscribe, so you are there when we go deeper. There is a lot more out there than we have covered today.